So a little brief introduction of who I am. My day job is I'm a county attorney in Kentucky. That means I'm a prosecutor. I always tell people that if I look too familiar, it probably means you've had a speeding ticket in my jurisdiction. So hopefully I don't look familiar to you. I'm a square supervisor on the Tell Shiloh excavation with ABR. And I believe in lifelong learning. So I'm currently finishing my master's in biblical history and archaeology through TBS in Katy, Texas. And I do have no idea why my slides are going on their own. Ben, do you have any idea? So I'm the director of expedition archaeology. But I like to tell folks there are two things you need to know about me to tell you who I am. Number one is that I want to be Indiana Jones when I grow up, okay? And number two, I tell you about my jobs. So I think it's important to tell you my most important job, and that's with an old Christmas picture, and that's husband and daddy. Now, I do like to tell folks that if my ladies were with me today, that little one in the middle of the picture would be up front doing the presentation. And that's one of the reasons she doesn't always get to come, because she would try to take over and do the presentation, all right? So, all right. Now, today's presentation, I'm not going to try to talk to the scholar today. I'm going to talk to us, people like me, on the everyday level. So that's what we're going to try to do, and we're going to try to have a little fun, okay? And so the idea is to have a little fun, learn something, and use the artifacts we have here. And in some cases, if you do not know, you can handle and touch. So if you didn't hear the spiel already, the display behind me is our museum display, and I don't have to tell people, we know how to act. We come in and we look and we won't touch things. Well, I want you to have the experience I get to have. At the display over here on this table, all those artifacts are there for you to handle and touch. Touch real history from the world of the Bible. Hold that in your hands. So don't miss that opportunity, okay? Now, this morning's presentation is unlike a lot of presentations you'll have that you come in and we'll take one topic and really break it down and go through the topic well. Instead, this morning, I'm going to give you little tastes of a lot of different subjects through the Old Testament. What my hope is, if I say something that's interesting to you, is that you will then go and do more research and use our resources at ABR to look up and find out more information on each subject, all right? Now, today we're going to focus on the Old Testament, so we're going to jump right in, but I always like to add one thing as I start my day. I always have two goals when I talk to a church group, and it's that I do one of two things. Number one is that if I can convince anyone in this room to read your Bible either more or in a more detailed fashion, I've done my job. Or number two, and this is the big one, we have a lot of young faces in the room, all right? And I love to talk to young people because I know that in our modern educational system, public education, they are going to be taught when any references to the Bible, these are not true. That's what they're going to be taught. They're going to be taught that these are morality tales to teach us how to behave, but there's no history there. And I want our young people, if they hear nothing else I say, to remember, I remember Mr. Tommy when they're challenged with something like that, and he told me, when I hear that junk, go do my homework. Because when we do our homework, we continually find the Bible to be trustworthy and historical. And so if you're a young person in the room and you hear nothing else I say, I want you to hear me say that, and we're going to see some examples of that here today. All right? So we're going to start with the oldest artifacts on display, and they're down in this case, and that's our cuneiform tablets. Anybody know what cuneiform is? By the way, in my training, I told you I'm an attorney, so we're trained on voir dire to ask questions to the jury. You didn't know that. And we'll talk about your test later, by the way. So anybody know what cuneiform is? No. Okay. Somebody in the room usually knows. It is one of the oldest forms of writing. It's a web-shaped writing, maybe the world's oldest form. And we have 3 tablets on display here today on loan from a museum, okay? We're going to start with 2 of them from the world of a guy named Abraham. Okay, so in this case, on my little stand here, is the tablet you can see in the picture. Now, what I want you to look at, do you see the fella seated here? He's sitting on a throne, and he has a crescent moon in front of him, okay? And so this figure is a ancient Mesopotamian deity, a god. The tablet dates to about 2100 BC, and the god's name is Sin or Nana. He is the moon god of Mesopotamia. Now here's what's interesting. This is the primary deity of two cities named Ur and Haran. Now, if you're a Bible reader, does those ring a bell to you? I see a lot of head shaking. Hometown of Abraham, right? All right, where he comes from. Now, what is interesting to me is that when we know the context, it is probably this deity that Abraham's family worships, okay? And then Abraham gets a call to worship the one true God, right? All right, and so for me, this actually speaks to me. In my prosecutor job, I deal with a lot of people that have a lot of mess. And especially in my part of the world, that's drug addiction, okay? And so when I think of this and the mess that Abraham's family is probably involved in, okay, that the whole world is involved in the belief in many gods, how God calls him out of that mess to follow him and establish a relationship with people, all right? And so to me, what that says is if Abraham and his family is in that mess, we might be in a mess as well. Maybe our family, our friends, but God can call us and our family and our friends out of our mess as well. And that simple lesson is what it speaks to me. But I think it's pretty cool we have a tablet on display from that world. Now, I want to talk about Abraham a little bit and an interesting synchronism we find with these cuneiform tablets. Now, thousands of these still exist in the archaeological record or museums across the world, okay? And I would love to tell you that each one of them holds some deep, ancient secret from the ancient world. And that's not what it is. Most of these are exactly things that we'd be doing today if we were writing in this fashion, recording our everyday business. And that's what people are doing, all right? They're recording important things to write them down, things of everyday life. Most of these are transactions or contracts, all right? Now, here's one thing that's interesting about these contracts and transactions they're recording. A large number of these record transactions for livestock. Now, what would that have to do with Abraham and a synchronism with the Bible? So, does anybody know how the wealth of Abraham is described in the biblical text? Let's look at a few verses, okay? Now, it's important to know that Abraham lives in a world before coins. There is no money. Genesis 13:2. Abraham was very rich in, what's the first word? Livestock, then silver and gold, okay? All right. Genesis 12:16. Pharaoh treated Abram well because of her, talking about his pretty wife, okay? And Abram acquired flocks and herds, male and female donkeys, male and female slaves and camels, livestock, describing wealth through livestock, okay? Genesis 24:35, the Lord has greatly blessed my master Abraham, and he has become rich. How is he rich? He's given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, male and female slaves, and camels and donkeys. I think it's interesting that when we talk about the wealth of Abraham, the Bible describes it in a fashion that focuses on livestock. And when we go to the material record of the time, what are people recording as they talk about wealth and transactions? Livestock. Now, it may sound like a simple thing, but I have a question for you. If the biblical writer is writing about Abraham 1,000, maybe 1,500, 1,300 years after he lived, as some would claim, much later than a guy named Moses, how would he describe Abraham's wealth? Probably talk about money, coins, right? But we find, in a simple fashion, we find the biblical writer getting the description correct, okay? And so we're going to look at several examples of that. And I want to show you one more thing on Abraham here before I move on, because I just like this tablet. I think it's fun. We're going to read you the translation. And so we see here the nice cuneiform, and we find the stamp of the scribe who wrote it over 4,000 years ago. That tablet is right here. You can see the scribe's stamp when you look in the case. And what he wrote was one dead goat. Now, did you all know that had some value? All right, so that's probably poor English, but one dead goat, and he talks about how it was received, and he records a year the city of Hunri was destroyed. Now, if you're a good archaeology nerd, you can kind of figure that information out and extrapolate, and we can actually get a date for this tablet, and the year is 2039 BC on our calendar. Most conservative scholars most conservative biblical scholars would probably put that during the lifetime of a guy named Abraham. Okay, so that's pretty cool, and I like these tangible connections to the biblical world. But as I promised, we have to bounce around, so we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects. Actually, we may not talk a whole lot about this because I've got a presentation later, so I'm going to cut you all short on this part. All right, but I like to talk about the Exodus, so this is my plug for my bonus presentation today. So if I don't bore you too bad before then, you'll have to hang around and hear this, all right? But we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I do want to look at one little focus from this time period that I say for this presentation, and that is our Shabdi here, okay? Now, you see our big green Egyptian figure from an Egyptian tomb? You would put 365 of these in your tomb. Now, why is that number unique? Every number of the days of the year. So in ancient Egypt, they believed that there was an afterlife. And they also believed the afterlife was unfortunately much like this one. So the bad news is, if you had to work through this life, guess what? There's work in that life too. Oh man, bummer. All right. Now, here's one thing how they handle that. So what would happen is you would put these funerary figures, these Shabtis in your tomb, and these Shabtis are going to help you with that problem of work in the afterlife. They are believed to come alive in the afterlife, and you can command them, and they can be commanded by the deity to do the work. Now, when we talk about the records in Genesis and Exodus, and we talk about Moses writing the Torah, we look at many examples in these books where the writer knows Egyptian words and Egyptian material incredibly well. And he would be Egyptian trained. And so there's a little something about these Shabtis that a pastor friend of mine pointed out to me that I said, man, I like that. That's interesting. So I want to read you about the command to the Shabti from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And I want you to pay attention to something interesting here, okay? All right, so what does the Book of the Dead say? How is the Shabti spoken to give direction? O statuette there, should I be called and appointed to do any of the labors that are done in the netherworld? Be thou counted for me at every moment. Do the work for me. All right? For planting the fields, for watering the soil, for conveying the sands of east and west. Okay, now this is where it's interesting. The Shabti is expected to respond in a specific way. All right? And it's a very simple but specific response that the Shabti is supposed to do in the afterlife. The response is, here am I. Now, I want you to look at something. When we have an account, we've got an Egyptian-trained Moses who grows up in the royal court. He's trained and educated in the Egyptian system. And how does he respond when confronted with deity? Okay? So let's go to the burning bush. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, so how does he respond? How has he been trained? How does he respond when confronted unexpectedly with deity? Here am I. Now, my buddy Brian Wendell says with these things, isn't that interesting? Now, can we be dogmatic about this connection? No, but it's one of those things I think is very interesting, and there's a lot to talk about when we look at those books, how the writer uses Egyptian words and knows them well. But I'm going to pass that along as a thought to look up as we have to move on. I told you I like talking about the Exodus, and if you want to hear more about it, you got to attend the bonus presentation. All right? So we're going to leave this behind, and we're going to talk about the conquest of Joshua. Okay? Now, I want to start by mentioning this is a subject ABR has been very specifically focused on. I forgot to change my slide. I usually talk about 3 sites. We're only going to talk about 2 this morning. But as I mentioned, each of these presentations, you're going to get a little taste. but I always like to start my Jericho's talk with a little teaser photo. Now, if you have not heard me speak before, you have probably figured out in the last 20 minutes, Tommy's a Bible believer, and I believe the Bible is historical and the Word of God, right? So I'm going to show you something, and I want you to hang with me. Now, you see the handsome fella in the picture? That's me, okay? Do you see that big wall of stones behind me? Okay, that is a Middle Bronze, Late Bronze wall that dates to about 1600 at least BC, and it's been there for 3,600 years. It has not moved, it is not restored, it didn't go anywhere. That is the wall of Jericho. But Tommy, didn't that fall? The walls come tumbling down? I think hopefully I've got your attention. How are we going to deal with that? Okay, so let's talk about Jericho. What do the minimalist scholars say? Things like this. This is what your kids are going to hear. The huge ruins of the Hyksos city gave rise to the folk tale attached to the hero Joshua. You can visit Jericho today, and they even, in the intro video, they talk about how there's been no evidence of the account in the Hebrew Bible. And so, for me, so you hear that, and a lot of times when we hear archaeologists, we swallow everything a so-called expert says is absolute fact when archaeology is interpretation. It is opinion, okay? So what I want to know is, what does the evidence show us? And so here's the thing. What does the evidence actually show? So on Jericho today, since I've zoomed in on it, we're going to focus just on those walls, okay? And I'm going to share a video with you of a friend of mine from ABR, our former director, a guy named Bryant Wood, and he's going to be followed by Dr. Stripling on the side at Jericho, and they're going to talk about the walls of Jericho. And I want you to pay good attention to what they have to say, and then we'll break it down.
Well, with regard to
turn the audio up a
walls
little,
falling, the Hebrew wording there is extremely precise. Now, all of our translations say the walls fell flat.
Right.
That's okay, I guess, but really the Hebrews tells you a little bit more. The Hebrew word is one word. The walls fell takatha, and that literally means fell beneath themselves. And that's exactly what we have there at Jericho. These walls, when they fell, had to collapse down the embankment or fall off that retaining wall beneath themselves. They were deposited at the base of the tell. And then the Israelite soldiers went up. Again, a small detail, but a later writer would have never known they had to go up. He would have said they rushed into the city.
Right.
But the Bible says they went up into the city. Very precise eyewitness account.
I think only archaeologists would come here or get away with this.
Well,
Standing on the retaining wall of Jericho.
you're standing where few have stood, and where we were standing, there was 30 feet of mud brick, and the excavations revealed several courses still clinging to the wall. They've now decomposed, but you can see where it collapsed outward, and in the bulk, the remnant of that red mud brick that created the ramp. And the Bible's very specific. The Israelites went up into the city.
And it sounds like anywhere they were around the city, they could have gone up into the city.
So that simultaneously they would have sieged the city. The inhabitants had no chance.
And you can almost imagine the size of this wall, because it would have been, what, 6 feet?
Yep.
Wide, and that would have been 30 feet tall, and you're already how far above the ground?
Well, 20 feet at its highest point of stone. So the stone wall's 20 feet, the mud brick is another 30, so 50
And then you have
feet.
another course of mud bricks at the top of the tell that are the same height. So when the Bible describes it as a city reaching up into the heavens, it must have looked impossible.
Okay, thank you to MJ in Grace with Jim Scudder for that video clip. So let's review, because I want to make sure you caught that. The walls of Jericho are made of how many parts? 2, okay? Now, our artist does a good job here, and you see the bottom creamier colored here, lighter colored. That represents what I call the stone revetment or foundational section of the wall. That's 20 foot tall. There's another section built on top of that that's 30 feet of mud brick. What part of the wall fell? The mud brick, yeah. Now, so the mud brick wall fell, and it fell in an interesting way. They have found this all around the city in excavations over the last 100 years, and I'm going to show you a visual. So we've colored this in so you can see from Dr. Kenyon's excavation. Here, the black represents the stone foundational revetment wall, the 20 feet, and the red represents the mud brick. Now, the mud brick did something interesting. It didn't kind of collapse all around. It didn't fall in. It fell out, and it fell out in an interesting way, didn't it? Now, if you look at this excavation from the 1950s, this report, it is a good example of what we find in the text. And it's a good example of why to read so carefully. The Hebrew word is they went up into the city. Now, it doesn't say they rushed through the gate. It doesn't say, that they stormed through what you would normally expect. They went up, which is an interesting word. What does the mud brick do? It literally creates a ramp over the stone revetment wall. Absolutely fascinating. I like how Dr. Wood said only an eyewitness would have this information, okay? And so when we look at it, it's an incredible, fascinating look at an illumination, a little something extra we would not have known without archaeology, helping us understand the world of the Bible and bringing that one little word up to life. Now, to save time today, I'm going to skip my part 2 here. It's about Rahab. I'm going to give you a little information. I mentioned the walls fell all around the city. There's one exception. There's always exception to the rule, isn't there? On the northeast corner of the site, the German team in the 19 teens found a section where the walls did not fall. Does anybody know what is built into the wall there? Where was Rahab's house? On the wall. What they found was houses built onto the wall. I would submit to you that would have been where Rahab's house was on the northeast corner. Also, an interesting note, if you know where the site sits there in the Jordan Valley, her site is what I would call on the far side from the parking lot. It's where where they found that. And if the spies are let out the window, let's change it. If they're let out the window on the other side, they have to circle the entire city to get to the mountains. In my mind, they're getting caught. Where she's at, straight shot to the mountains. You can't make that stuff up, okay? Now, I want to move on, and we're going to talk about where we get to excavate at the site of Shiloh. And so this picture is from this summer. See all those ladies? I got to do paperwork where they did back-breaking hard physical labor. Yes. So the supervisor's job is hard in a different way. It's a lot of paperwork. The goal of archaeology is actually not to dig. It is to preserve the information from what we've excavated. So my job is doing that most of the day, writing the paper, keeping up with that. I'm real proud of my ladies. That's why I use the picture. They did excellent work, all right? So Shiloh in Joshua 18:1 says, and the whole congregation, the children of Israel, assembled together at Shiloh and set up the tabernacle of the congregation there, and the land was subdued before them. We call Shiloh the first capital of Israel, as established by Joshua. This is where he puts the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant, okay? And various examples here today on our touch table are pottery pieces from this site, all right, the site of Shiloh. Now, there is an archaeology factor that is unique to Shiloh that's different than we find other places. I need a young person to help me real quick. I need a volunteer. Somebody, can I get a volunteer? All right. Right over here. Come on up. All right. And you come hang out with me for a minute, and everybody else is going to watch a video. So I'm going to send you to hear Dr. Stripling, and he's going to then go to Shiloh, and he's going to explain to you about something unique about our site. So you wait for me right over here, please. All right?
We have something that no other site in Israel has. Around the entire perimeter, there are storage rooms, big storage rooms. And they date to the period before the Israelites were there, because the pottery at the bottom is Canaanite Amorite pottery. And on top of that, we have the classic collared rim jar, which is what we would call the Israelite storage jar, very typical. So you can see that it was used. You're going to occupy cities you didn't build, you're going to live in houses you didn't construct. They're using these storage rooms. Now, this begs the question, why all these storage rooms? What is unique about Shiloh? Why does no other site have this configuration? Well, this is a really nice shot of these storage rooms. When people tithed in biblical times, how did they do that?
They brought grain, they brought items because they didn't have coins anyways.
Yeah.
But you're bringing your
But
offerings.
they would bring commodities. So what do we find? A material culture that matches what we read. It's what I call verisimilitude. It matches what we read in the text. Storage rooms, bone deposit, horned altar, pomegranates, it all begins to add up.
And looking like there could have been a platform here in this area.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to skip the rest of that. So Finian, come over here. You all give Finian a big hand. All right. All right. So he's going to, he's doing well with his instructions already. All right. So I told him to hold this up here. 2 good hands on there we go. He's holding an authentic pottery sherd. All right. So why is he up here helping us? I want you to look at the picture on the screen and look at Finian's pottery sherd. So hold it a bit like that. Can you see the resemblance? I see people shaking their head. All right. So this is how archaeology works. We rarely find the whole vessel intact. You find the pieces. All right. So this is an example of a pithos on display in the Israeli Museum from the site of Shiloh. All right. When we look here, we can see. Now, why is it doing that? And we can see that how this is similar. Okay. And so he is holding the rim of an Iron Age 1 collared rim storage jar, one of these pithos. Now, why is this interesting to us at Shiloh? Dr. Scott's talked about these storage rooms in places that would normally be houses. So, you're an ancient Israelite, you live in the world before money, and you want to go to the house of God, and you're going to bring your tithes and offerings. What do you bring? Commodities, grains, things that you're raising. Now here's your question. If you're the priests at Shiloh, where are you going to put all that stuff? What do you got to have? Storage. So we find storage rooms full of these large storage jars. Okay? And so Finian is holding this sherd. I don't know why it keeps doing that, but all right, holding this sherd. And here's what I like to tell people. This dates to the time of a little boy you may have heard of in church, a guy named Samuel. So we're circa that time, all right? And now if Samuel is interning and being educated and raised there, what do you think the chances are Samuel is working with all that storage material as the people come and bring their tithes and offerings? Reckon he's doing that? I would think so. And so when he holds atop of one of these pithos, one of the storage jars from Shiloh, I like to tell people of everything here on display, no one has asked me about this morning. No one, I reckon, even touched it in the touch display. He is holding probably one of the closest witnesses, the mute witness to biblical history in this room. This is from the time of Samuel. I think that's really cool, all right? And it helps us think about that time. So Finian, if you don't care, go put that back in my sandbox over there, and you all give him a big hand, all right? All right? And we're going to move on and talk about one of my favorite accounts from the Old Testament. Now, I like how the Bible doesn't start its accounts with phrases like once upon a time, or in a land far, far away, long, long ago. Have you ever noticed when the Bible starts its accounts, it often scopes it in time or geography? Now, I'm going to read you a verse, and I want you to see if you can figure out what we're getting ready to talk about. Now, remember I showed you a picture of my little girl and my wife earlier? So one of the ways I stay in touch with my little girl when I'm in Israel is I send her a video every day of what I'm up to, directed to her. And I decided to put one of those videos in my presentation. So I'm going to share a personal video with you of a place I'm at. And I send this to her. Now the verse says, now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soka in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Damim between Soka and Azekah. Now before I let you watch the video, I need another volunteer, and I need a boy. I need a boy for this one. We got a young man, another young man. I will draft you. So, any volunteers to help me? I didn't have any trouble getting volunteers last night. I need a young man who wants to hold an artifact. All right, so mom volunteered somebody. Send him on up. All right, thank you. And all right, you wait for me over at the touch table. So in the video, I am at Azekah. And I want you to listen when we talk about this place and how it illuminates this verse and what happened here.
Hey Anna, this
Let's
is
turn the
Daddy
volume
coming to
up a
you
little
from a very special place. I'm at the archaeological site of Azekah. Now, that probably doesn't mean a lot to some people, but it's really important because of a reference in the Bible. It talks about a battle that took place between Azekah and Soka. And we remember how the Bible doesn't start its accounts with once upon a time. It starts it with geography often, and time and place. And it says, between Azekah, where we are, and Soka. Well, Soka's on the ridge right over there. So in other words, between there and here, place we can see, in the valley of Elah, and you can see this valley below us where farming's occurring, and it goes around the corner here. Somewhere from over there to this point, in this valley, a battle occurred. And sweetie, you've probably heard of it. There was this big ugly guy, and his name was Goliath. And somewhere...
So I'm going to cut myself off to save time, but the Bible says between Azekah and Soka, and then it begins to describe what happened in this place. So now, because of archaeology, we know where those 2 points are, and in that farming valley, along those ridges, is where there's a big ugly guy, as I like to call him, named Goliath, who come down, and every day he'd talk smack. All right? So come over here with me. I've got somebody to introduce you all to. Okay? All right, come right here. And your name? David. Everybody say hello, David. All right. So David comes down to talk to Big Ugly. All right? And what does David do and respond? Talk smack back. All right? And Big Ugly don't like it. Now, so Stephen, you're holding an authentic ancient sling stone. Okay? Now, I have a question for you. You've been holding that, and I put it in your hand, and I'll let you hold it for a while because I want you to feel the weight of it. Now, what I didn't tell you is I want you to imagine me coming back over here, and now you're staying there because I'm going to take it and go over here. And when I was younger, I was a professional baseball prospect. One Red Scout said I had the best fastball he saw in a little guy. And I don't know that I can get, at that distance, I can probably get you about 100 miles an hour to 120 from over here, and I'm going to hit you in the head with that, okay? And that's the exact speed a good ancient slinger could do with that. What's that going to do to you?
Kill me.
It's going to kill you. Yeah, he's got the right. So if you don't handle anything else in our touch display, listen to Stephen and handle our sling stone. I want you to feel the weight of it, and I want you to imagine what I just told you. We know by modern studies that slingers 100, 120 miles an hour, the ancient writers tell us the good ones can choose where to hit you. Right eye, left eye, nose, or mouth. They're accurate. It's like the Major League fastball pitcher that can throw 100 miles an hour, and as we say, paint the corner. Okay? And so that's what we have. Now, give Stephen a big hand because he got volunteered by Mom, I think. And so if you don't care to put that back in our display, all right? And so we're going to finish up a little bit with our David and Goliath, and I'm going to tell you Tommy's take on David and Goliath, okay? We often have made this account God's miracle for David, and I think we're actually misunderstanding a little and also maybe missing a lesson for us. Do not misunderstand me. God is clearly in the story. He's clearly interacting for David, but I think it's in a different way than we understand. First of all, Stephen is a good example. David is not a young fellow like Stephen. The Hebrew word is youth, that we translate in English as youth, means young warrior. It does not mean boy, okay? He's got a little meat on his bones, let's say it that way, okay? Maybe in his late teens, we're not sure, but he's not a little guy. And also, we often imagine, because of our world, he's got a slingshot and a stone, and he does not. He has a sling. So I'm going to show you my sling, and I want you to imagine that sling stone. So he's using something like this, okay? Now I'm going to show you how I like to. There's 2 ways to do this. Up here, all right? Now, I'm not going to do the other way. I like this one, and that way I don't hit anybody. But you can also do it like a lady softball pitcher does it on the side. A lot of them do it that way too. It's easier on the rotator cuff. But, so here's what I think the lesson is for us. I think of my dad's generation, and it helps me understand this because my dad grew up in the era of the Western and cowboys and Indians, and I imagine the boys with the BB gun And the can on the fence all day shooting it off because this is the world before Wi-Fi and phone. Oh, yeah, we got to find something to do. So David's out in the field keeping the sheep. And what's that boy going to do every day to pass the time while he's keeping the sheep? I think practice, practice, practice. You got it. When David comes that morning, he doesn't know he's going to face Goliath. And here's the thing. When you understand the weaponry of the time, Goliath, big, ugly, bad warrior, you don't want to get close to him. You don't want to get in his wheelhouse. It's going to go bad. Okay? You want to reach out and touch him. In the world of David, the sling is more accurate than the bow and arrow and a farther distance at this point in history. Okay? He is likely every day practicing with the perfect weapon for his biggest enemy. Now, what is the lesson of David and Goliath? All right? I believe the lesson is this. God has prepared David with the perfect weapon that he is now an expert in for his biggest enemy that he never even knows he's going to face. How does that apply to our lives? If we will allow him, God will prepare us for our challenges that we will never see coming just as well. I think that's the story for us from David and Goliath. And a little final note, what do I think happened? See, we always forget in our images, we don't show Goliath with his shield bearer. You see, the boys, the big guy is talking smack, and then you got this Hebrew boy talking smack back, and this experienced bad warrior loses his cool. What? Who does he think he is? Doesn't he know how many men I've killed? And it suggests probably he steps out from behind his shield bearer because always we've got David back here. Read the text carefully. David runs to the battle line. He seizes the moment of opportunity. Goliath has opened the window. And I told you I was a baseball player. Now my rotator cuff don't allow it anymore because it's all scar tissue now. But there was a time I could not imagine if I'd have worked with one of these and you could let me have a run and go, the leverage I could have put behind something like that and the sizzle that would come off that stone. I imagine David was much better than I would have been. And so I think, again, the lesson for us is God prepared David with what he needed, and he will prepare us too. All right, so we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about another element of David's life, and then it's the Psalms, all right? And I need another volunteer, and I like a young lady. Oh, good job. All right, so come on up. We're going to do something cool, okay? All right. What's your name, young lady? Ellie. All right. Come over here with me, Ellie. Now, you've got good, sure hands, right? Because you cannot drop this or I'm in a lot of trouble, okay? Ellie's going to stand right here in the middle, and she is going to hold an authentic 3,000-year-old oil lamp. And I think one of the neatest ways to learn about the ancient world is to interact with daily life of those who lived. Anybody know how you light an oil lamp in the time of the Bible? What do you use? Oil? What kind? Olive oil. So I steal my wife's olive oil from the kitchen. Okay. We're going to put it in Ellie's lamp. And if somebody don't care to get me a paper towel, because I'm going to get my fingers a little bit oily here. Okay. We're going to take, and Ollie, you got Ellie, you got Perrin over there with you. They want to get a photo about now. Okay. Thank you, sir. I may not have soaked that enough. Just a second. There we go. All right. So, all right. Now, normally we turn the lights off, but we're not going to do that because my understanding it takes the lights 8 minutes to come back on. Okay? But this is still a good picture. Make sure you get a good picture of her and send it to me. All right? And so this helps us connect with the world of the Bible. And I want to look at a verse. Okay? Psalms 119, 105. Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light on my path. Now, Ellie has a lamp from the time that psalm is written. Now, some of us are young and we still have really good imaginations and can pretend well. Others of us are going to remember how to do it. And I want you to imagine right now we can turn all the light off in here, and this is our only source of light. Ellie, how far do you think we can see? Not that far. All right. What do I think a way that I apply this verse? Okay. What I think the psalmist is telling us is that God often, sometimes I like to think of teenagers, and I remember being a teenager and praying those big prayers. God, who am I supposed to marry? Please, Lord, don't let him be ugly. Where am I supposed to go to college? And let's face it, God often doesn't give us the answers to questions like that. I'm not saying he won't and he can't. It doesn't usually happen that way. But God will lead us and guide us, and he will give us answers. And I think this verse is a good idea. See, what we know when we know how far we can see with the lamp, if the lights are off, Ellie and I can see far enough to take 1 or 2 steps. Step with me. Come on. Now, when we take our step and we trust God for that step, now what can we see? Our next step. And I think that's the lesson of the lamp. So, I always like to connect a bit with the biblical world in a neat way you never can do anywhere else, and that's by lighting our lamp. So you all give Ellie a really big hand, and we're going to extinguish. Okay. All right. And so, can you set that back on the table for me without spilling the oil, please? That way I don't get in trouble. All right. All right. Now let's see where we're at time-wise. Okay. So I'm going to skip this because I do want to spend a minute talking about another subject. That's our Jezebel talk right there. Okay. And I'm going to skip this one because I do want to spend a minute talking about this. You probably your whole life in Sunday school or church, when the pastor preaches on the Old Testament, you've heard them talk about idols. Has anybody actually seen an actual idol from the world of the Bible? I don't see any hands up. You're going to change that today because we have 2 on display in this room. Okay? I said that once and I had a couple guys get up and walk out. He didn't let me finish. So, all right. So this is called a Judean pillar figurine. They're clearly female in their design, and over 1,000 of these have been found in the archaeological record. They are usually related with the pagan goddess Astarte or Asherah. If you don't know who that is, the husband, wife, consort, she's the wife, consort, whatever, mother and some of a guy named Baal or Baal. This is not good, okay? Now here's what's interesting. I told you about 1,000 of these have been found. The vast majority are found in private homes that we identify as Israelite. Oh, yeah, I heard the oh. That's exactly right. So here's the question. Sometimes you see things in media. There was an article on these several years ago I saw in media that talked about the Bible getting it wrong, that the Israelites were not monotheists. They didn't just worship one God. And it really irritated me reading that article because I said, did they not bother to even read the text? Okay? So these come from the time of the prophets, the Iron Age too. And do we recall the call of the prophets well? What are they saying? Put away your idols. As a little boy, for me, that was always some big metal statue on a hill somewhere. And that's not, and I'm not saying those things didn't exist, but in general, that's not what it is. These are personal, private things in our homes. So that's where they're at. Now, we do have a couple examples. We have a large head of one here, but we have a body of one, and I'd like you to look at the body because always when I tell bad news, I like to share a little good news. You'll notice the body of our idol figure is missing its head, okay? It has no head. Now, if you will notice where the head is broken off, it is not rough, it is not jagged, it is smooth. Why would that be? Does anybody know how you put away your idol? Cut its head off. Yeah. All right. So I would like to think some ancient Israelite, after getting it wrong, got it right. All right? With that one on display. They're in this case, and so check those out. Now, one final thing to note as we come to our last minute, I do want to talk about an important chronological point in the Old Testament, and it's when the Babylonians destroy Jerusalem, and the temple in 586 BC. It's a really important marker. This begins the exile period for the people, and we know the Babylonians, they are, the king of the Babylon is Nebuchadnezzar, one of the really famous bad guys of the Bible. All right, so we have our third cuneiform tablet is right here in this display, and it dates to the year 592 BC. And I'd just like to point it out because it ends with the following phrase: the 13th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. In another translation, it follows with king of the world. All right, so we have the name from a tablet over 2,600 years ago of one of the famous bad guys of the Bible. All right, so we have now got to the point that I need to wrap up and take questions. And so, Henry, are you assisting with that? Or I'm not sure of our situation. Pastor's going to help.
I'll help out, and Glenn's going to get a mic over there. We have time for maybe one or two questions, and we wanted to let you all know, we didn't say this yet, we are recording all of these. These will be available on the ABR website or YouTube channel later in the year. So you don't need to film or take pictures. You can, but we wanted you to know. But also know we're recording before you ask your questions that will go on the internet forever.
All right.
Question.
Do we have a question over here maybe?
Right here.
What was the wick for the lamp?
So I'm going to give you two answers. If you live in the ancient world, probably use a flax, is my understanding. If you want to look at the one that Tommy used today, it is shoestring from Israel. Our shoestring has a lot of nylon in it and will melt. That doesn't, and that's what I use in our. It's from one of the replica lamps, but I put it in our water room. But in the ancient world, you would use a flax. Yes. Yes. So the question was the time frame we've been talking about for the lamp and the other material today. We've all focused on the Old Testament this morning. As far as my talk, we'll focus on the New Testament in a presentation later today. Yep. So he asked if Jericho was one of the oldest cities in the world. They certainly advertise that they are. It's probably safer to say it's one of the oldest. It's almost certainly probably not the oldest. But they do have remains there, I think, that go back to the Neolithic, that is quite a bit older than the city that Joshua and the Israelites would have encountered. So yes, so it was, and one of the rules in the Middle East is if it's a good place to live now, it usually stays a good place to live for thousands of years. Access to water, things of that nature. Yep.
So you have talked about Abraham, Moses, Nebuchadnezzar. So are all these different tells that you have dug?
No. So I have worked at the Shiloh excavation. I'm referencing work by many archaeologists over many different excavations over many different years. So I'm giving general information, not so much a talk on our specific work. We do a presentation just on Shiloh sometimes, but I won't be doing that today.
What was the average weight of the slingshot stone?
That's a really good question, and since I don't know the answer, I'm sure Henry does. And here's the answer to that. I don't know off the top of my head, but we do have a weapons expert that works with our dig, and he actually knows the answer to that. I have the information somewhere because we would compare a sling stone to later a ballista. And what is the weight that makes the difference? At the time of David, we don't have ballista balls. You could do later in the Roman era. And so knowing the weight is important. If you'll message me, I can get you the answer. I just don't know it off the top of my head. So.
Thanks. We're going to go to break now. On the touch table, there is the slingshot ball. It's a touch table, not a throw table. Refreshments, bathrooms are in the hallway. The table's over there to look at. Let's thank Tommy for this presentation.
Thank you.